Welcome to the Impactus podcast, episode number 5, where we are trying to equip you as a man for a life of purpose and godly impact. My name's Kirk Giles, joined by Mauricio Rosa. Mauricio, on our last podcast, you made the announcement that it was going to be my last podcast, and here I still am.
That's right. That's what I said. If my memory serves me well, that this was, that was your last podcast as the president of Promise Keepers Canada Impactus. And but we figured out a way to keep you, for a little longer. We engaging with us and continue on doing some of these episodes.
Well, I said in the last podcast that I was going to be your personal assistant. So I guess this is, here I am still.
Can't you see that how I'm smiling, and then how happy I am?
No, it is really good to be able to be on the podcast and to continue to serve the ministry in this way, even though today is actually, we're recording this while I'm still working up at the ministry. But as men are watching this, today is actually my first day of being a pastor.
How do you feel about that, Kirk? How do you feel about, transitioning, and now you are Pastor Kirk of Forward Church. So how's your first day going?
So far, so good. Nobody's complained about anything yet. And I haven't had to deal with any COVID issues in the church yet or anything. It's been an amazing first day. Now, I'm excited, obviously, about this opportunity to serve Jesus in this way. But I also, I have a lot of mixed emotions, obviously, because of the time at the ministry of Promise Keepers Canada and now Impactus. And just to be able to, the relationships that I've formed with men, with staff over the years, definitely am going to miss all of these guys, but excited at how the Lord's leading the ministry and how the Lord's leading me as well. So it's good. And it's a good change. And we really believe God's in this every step of the way. One of the things, Mauricio, that probably was one of the more controversial things that I've personally dealt with over the last couple of years has been the Me Too movement.
Yes.
I had a blog before we launched the new website. I had a blog and I wrote several articles about the Me Too movement. And one of the things that I heard during that time from a number of guys was, what about the guys who've been abused? Who's talking about them? And, Me Too kind of took on a flavor of almost attacking men in some worlds. And so, it's been an interesting journey to go on over the last little while, thinking about Me Too and where we're at today as a society as well. And I know you've had you interact with men in different ways, and you and I have talked a lot about Me Too. What are some of your reflections of that over the last couple of years?
Well, Kirk, I really appreciate you bringing this up, because I think in a society that we live right now, sometimes when we address the other side of the coin, people think that you are doing that in detriment of the other one. And it's not that at all. I think all this does to us, I think thinking about the Me Too movement and the wrong that a lot of men has done doesn't make the right what a lot of women has done. And I think in all, it does to us, it really shows us how broken of a world we are, and that the problem is really much more inside of each and every one of us than actually around us. And in my interaction with guys, yes, I have a person, someone that I know that has been in a kind of an abusive relationship with his wife, and he it's a sad story, because at the end of the day, the marriage ended and the relationship broke and all that. But it's also good to see how God is a God of restoration, no matter the situation, no matter where you are, you come from, that you are not fated to kind of stay that way. And I think
Yeah.
today he this friend of mine, he has, he's happily married and have beautiful family, and God has completely restored his life.
That's awesome. We are today going to shift the story to the topic of men too. So not me too, but men too. And I had the privilege recently of interviewing Dr. Kelli Palfy, who's written a book called Men Too, and talking about men who've experienced sexual abuse, primarily when they were children. That's where the book goes. But men who've been abused, and what's the impact on a man's life, and how does a man process and heal from the abuse that he's experienced. So obviously this is a sensitive topic for a lot of different people. And I want to encourage you to listen to this interview with that kind of sensitivity. I also want to encourage you that if you know somebody, a guy who's been abused, or if you yourself have been abused, I want to encourage you to really listen to Dr. Palfy. First of all, I really appreciate that it's a woman who's writing this and has done research on this. I think there's power in that, in just the whole narrative of our society right now. So I'm encouraged by her research, her honesty, her insight and wisdom on this topic. But yeah, listen to this, share it with some friends if it'll be helpful for them. Share it with some women who are married to a man who has experienced abuse as a child. However this can help, get this message out to as many people as possible. Let's go to this interview now with Dr. Kelli Palfy on the topic of men too. Kelli, it is so good to have you on the podcast with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an honor.
Kelli, you have written a book on a really important topic, and one that just isn't talked about enough in our society. We've all heard the phrase "Me Too" over the last few years, but you've written a book called Men Too. And it just talks about the whole aspect of sexual assault on men, and we'll unpack that more in the conversation today. But I was surprised at how prevalent sexual assault really is on men, and I think we don't talk about it enough, and so we don't understand the statistics around it. So, how prevalent is this issue in men's lives?
Well, Kirk, first off, we're talking not just specifically about men, but about boys. So research shows that 1 out of every 6 males is sexually abused to some extent prior to the age of 18. And we know that that statistic is sort of a general statistic, but that in certain populations that there is a higher prevalence. So for example, in the prison population, we know that sexual abuse is quite prevalent.
Right.
We know sorry.
1 in 6. It's remarkable to even try and wrap your head around that. Like you try and think about, people that you go to the grocery store and see every day whenever you're shopping, and just the idea that 1 in 6 on average. Now, like you said, in some populations it's more prevalent, but it's just I think it's a mind-boggling number for us to try to understand, isn't it?
Absolutely. And part of that is because, like you mentioned, nobody talks about it, least of all the victims themselves.
Right. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too. And because I know you cover a lot of ground in the book. But I want to give our listeners kind of a bit of an overview of the book, because I think we have different people who will be listening to this conversation. And one of the really, I think, aha moments or light bulb moments for me is when you start talking about offenders. So we'll spend some time talking about victims, but let's start by talking about the offenders. When a boy is abused, when a child is abused, who's the typical offender in the life of a child?
Well, research again shows that about 90 to 92% of the time, it is someone that is well-known and trusted by the family. So unfortunately, offenders go to great extents to win the trust of their victims, of the victim's family, and to sort of come across as the least likely person to ever be suspected of being an abuser. So,
wow. So yeah. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a boy who's experiencing that reality of someone he knows maybe even someone he loves, right? It could be a family member, a friend that he loves. And what does that do to the heart and the mind of the victim when the abuser is someone that they already know and might deeply love?
Right. So the damage done by sexual abuse is, it's very similar to what might happen to a girl or woman, but there's also, certain other aspects that may be more prevalent for a man, or a boy. So first off, it depends, a lot on the age of the victim. So if they were a very young child, like an infant, perhaps they may not have developed their own ability to self-regulate, so their own ability to calm themselves. So if they are abused prior to establishing that skill, it can have a profound effect on them physiologically right off the bat. If a victim is, a little bit older and, like you mentioned, they like their abuser, they can be very impacted later on by the awareness, that they liked their offender. And when they learn to understand the meaning behind sexual engagement, they can start to question whether or not they were willing participants, or whether or not they're homosexual, or whether or not they, enjoyed it, that kind of thing. And then, so I mentioned that, there's some differences between the way it impacts girls versus the way it impacts boys and men. So, obviously we've got cultural biases, masculine biases, right? So, boys aren't supposed to be victims. Boys are supposed to be protectors. So, people don't talk about this, right? Girls and women contribute to men's silence too by, sort of our expectations about what we think, the way we think boys and men should be behaving. I think there's this sort of fear that, if a boy or a man is vulnerable, that they, might not be able to rebound or something like that, or that they're less of a man, which is so not true.
Right.
So lots of, just so many things, so many ways that abuse affects a boy and a man.
Does it ever reach a place where, for a boy, it just makes it hard for him to trust sexual partners in the future? Like, when he goes to get married, or does just a general relationship of trust become difficult for him?
Absolutely. And again, especially depending on the age that their offenses occurred, right? So, they may be, they may have a general lack of trust of people, period. They may also not trust themselves, right? So if their own bodies responded the way God designed their bodies to respond, they may question their own sexuality. Right. They may struggle with this idea, am I heterosexual, am I homosexual, depending on the sex of their offender. But yeah, absolutely, I think another big thing that happens, there's this avoidance of intimacy because, emotional intimacy even, because if they have this secret that they want to guard, right, they would be naturally inclined to sort of keep this distance between themselves and their partner, lest they accidentally disclose. Right. So it's like they would be avoiding any sort of intimate conversation, again, so that they wouldn't accidentally disclose to their partner.
Right.
So it can cause lots of problems.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that whole idea of disclosing their abuse, and some of the barriers that as an adult, a man might face around that. I've worked with men for most of my adult life, like over 20 years, I've worked with men. And honestly, I was trying to think the other day about how many men do I know who have told me about their being abused as a child. And off the top of my head, there was a very small number of names and faces that came to my mind of guys who would talk about that. And I've had men talk to me about everything that you can possibly imagine, but very few have ever talked to me about being sexually abused. And so, assuming the statistics are correct, 1 in 6 boys, it seems like men aren't as likely to talk about the abuse they've experienced. So what would be some of the barriers? I think you've kind of touched on them a little bit, but what are some possible barriers that a guy might face in just disclosing his abuse?
Right, Kirk, and you just brought up a very good point that actually I was going to say that, perhaps after doing this podcast, you might notice you get a few more disclosures or more men coming forward, because research shows that boys and men don't typically talk about conversations or topics that they don't hear other boys and men talking about. So there's this idea that they don't want to be cast out of the village, or they don't want to be seen as less of a man. boys and men don't talk about abuse for a lot of reasons, which is the focus of my book. That was the question I was trying to answer with my doctoral research. One of the things that really kind of surprised me, I guess, because I'm not a parent perhaps, but this idea that they're protecting their families, right? They protect, let's say mom and dad are, have good images in the community. They don't want to tarnish their parents' name by having been victimized, or they feel like it would be too hard for their parents to handle this information. Sometimes, let's say they have a sibling that is not well and mom and dad have to pay a lot of attention to that sibling. The boy will think, oh, I can't drop this bomb on mom and dad because, they already have enough on their plate. Right.
Yeah. Man, just so many things. And even so then as they become an adult, there's a lot of guys who still don't talk about it as adults, about what happened to them. Do they keep that same kind of family loyalty even as adults? Hey, I'm a full grown man now, but I'm still going to bring shame on mom and dad if I talk about this. Is that does it still get carried on?
Definitely. And I think it's, it is different for each victim, but yeah, for sure. There's also, I think it's a lot less now, but in the past there was this myth that if you were victimized, you were automatically going to become an offender. Right. So not true, right? Like research shows that less than 9% of male victims become offenders themselves. So, but that has been a huge fear for men in the past. And just this sort of idea of, again, self-preservation that, if I tell people this, my secret is out and people are, I might fall apart, or people might view me as less of a man, or, they might question my sexuality.
Right.
They might not believe me. That's a big one.
Yeah.
For boys, again, because their offender might have been a friend of the family, someone who's well respected in the community, there's a very strong bias that they won't, or problem with this idea of being believed, right? So right. I think that was the second most predominant theme that came up in my research, that no one would help them or believe them.
Wow, that is just such a... Man, that's such a picture of, I think, two things. First of all, there's lies that we believe as humans about ourselves and our stories. And then I think it's also just, in some ways, it's a reflection of the culture that we live in, isn't it? That you just think, like, I know, I'll speak to this. I know when Me Too first kind of hit the public airways, I spoke a lot about Me Too quite publicly, and really challenged men in terms of the way we relate with women, and how this is kind of bringing to the surface things that have been hidden for a long time. And I think that I had a lot of guys, I shouldn't say a lot, I had a few guys push back at me, and they said, everybody believes it when the woman says that she was abused, yep, but they don't believe it when the guy says that this is what happened to him. And that's a cultural reality for a lot of men.
And the biases against boys, that they're never victims, of that they're supposed to be able to protect themselves. These are some of the reasons that boys and men don't come forward. Sometimes they are confused in their own mind, especially, if they liked their offender prior to the abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's I want to talk for a couple of minutes to men who are listening, who maybe go, yeah, this isn't really me, or maybe I'm wrestling and trying to think through, was I abused? Wasn't I abused? Like, I don't have any big memories of things. And then there's other guys who would think to themselves, yeah, I know I was abused, but I know I've gotten over it. Everything's fine in my life. I've moved on. Just let's talk about some of the signs of trauma that a man should be looking for in his life, because we can live in denial and think, hey, this doesn't affect me. Or maybe we don't think that we were ever abused. We've created another story of what happened to us. So what are some signs that a man should look for in his own life to just examine the kind of trauma he's experienced and maybe help him to identify it as, no, I actually was abused. I experienced sexual assault on my life as a child. What are some of those signs?
Well, first off, anything that would be considered sexual assault against a girl would be considered sexual assault if it's perpetrated against a boy.
Right.
So that's a first off, I think, Hollywood in the past has sort of, glamorized male sexual abuse as a rite of passage or a coming of age experience. So these kinds of things have confused boys and men. But, any unwanted sexual touching would be considered abuse, especially if it's perpetrated by someone who is more than a year older than them. So, so unwanted sexual touching, I say unwanted, and that can be confusing for boys because they might be saying in their head, well, I didn't protest, right? But technically children are not emotionally or cognitively capable of consenting to sexual activity. They're not aware of the consequences. That's why we have laws in place. So, sometimes, with the whole grooming process, a perpetrator will win the trust of the victim. The victim's family will generally try to, slowly make time to be alone with the victim. And then, perhaps ask them what they know about sexual matters, try to educate boys. I think, they'll treat them like they're more of a man than a boy. And, for example, show them explicit material or offer to teach them how to masturbate, that kind of thing. That would be considered abuse. Sometimes, for example, they'll try to get them alone in a sleeping situation, like take them camping or away for a ball game over the weekend. And then, when they're in the hotel room or the tent, they'll fondle the boy while they're sleeping, that kind of thing. So again, it's more confusing, I think, for a boy because of the way society has kind of sent these messages that, boys men don't never turn down sex, right? So I think that can be very confusing for a boy, but, so, any of those scenarios where there would be, someone in a position of authority over a boy or someone more than a year older than a boy, it would be considered abuse.
Yeah, and I think that's really important what you've just said too, and especially what you talked about a child not being capable emotionally of processing what's going on. Because earlier you mentioned how sometimes our bodies may respond to the abuse in what would be a normal physical response sexually. And so you end up in a space of, you can almost convince yourself that, well, my body responded this way, so I must have been consenting to this. And I think that, what I hear you describing is there's a real difference between if your body responded versus whether or not you were even emotionally capable of consenting to this.
Absolutely. And Kirk, girls and women's bodies respond as well. It's just often less detectable. And of course, it's more visual if a man's body responds. And then the other piece of that is offenders often use that as sort of evidence against the victim, right? Like they'll say things like, oh, look, you're enjoying this, right? So then basically a perpetrator's ultimate goal is to leave their victims confused. And, I think it's just that much easier to confuse a boy because of the fact that it's such a visible thing when they get an erection.
Yeah, right. So if a guy is listening to you and he thinks, man, I think I might have been abused. Like I'm hearing this and there's a chance I've been abused. What are some steps that he should begin to take? And before you answer that question, I just want to speak to the issue of shame for a minute, if I can. I just want to say to men that one of the greatest lies of the devil in our lives is to try to hold us in shame of whatever. This conversation is talking about sexual abuse that we've experienced, but it could be anything. And shame causes us to hide and to carry burdens we were never meant to carry. And so, Jesus invites you to bring things into the light, not so that you can have more shame, but so that the shame can be lifted from you and you can experience moving towards freedom in your life. So I just want to say that to guys before we jump into this conversation, because I can just hear guys rolling their eyes, if you can hear eyes rolling. And so, I just think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I add to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, go for it.
Brene Brown, you're probably familiar with her work on shame, right? She talks about, how, actually it might not be her work that was this story, but, one of the things that I learned is that during my research is that shame is one of these emotions that I think she does say this, sorry, that as soon as you even say the word shame, you can feel it, right? And so this sort of awareness, as a therapist, I would encourage men to be aware that, the shame belongs to the offender, not to you, right? But that just that sort of shame is the one emotion that if we even say the word, like, we can all get this like physiological rush because we've all felt shame in the past. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about some steps that a victim should take if they recognize that, yeah, this is me. I was abused. I experienced sexual assault as a child. What are some things that he should do?
Well, I would say, for them to educate themselves would be helpful, right? Because I think one of the big struggles that boys and men face is sort of understanding their own responses, their own level of responsibility in the situation, which is, they're not responsible for their abuse. I think it's very helpful for boys and men to understand the extremely sophisticated grooming process that the different types of offenders use. I think that alone, I think, can help reduce their shame. This is stuff I've covered in my book. Basically, there is a lot of organizations both in Canada and the US that support male survivors of sexual abuse. A couple of the bigger ones, malesurvivor.org is in the States, and then there's another one called 1 in 6. Not Christian organizations, but they have a lot of great information nonetheless. And just, seeking help. One of my participants in my research said, tell somebody, talk about it. And if they don't believe you, find someone else. I thought that was great, find support, talk to somebody, find a trauma-trained therapist, reach out, get help, that kind of thing, right? This idea that men have a voice now, boys and men also have a voice. I loved what you were saying about how you were kind of, advocating for in the Me Too movement for men to sort of step up and stuff like that. I feel the same, like, for women also to, step up and stop like silencing men. So it'd be an interesting conversation to have.
That would be an interesting conversation. You're right. That'd be a powerful conversation to have.
Do it.
I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about the reality that a lot of guys are like, see a problem, fix a problem, move on. And when you're dealing with trauma, it is really not that simple as, identify the problem, fix the problem, move on with your life. So for the sake of just full disclosure to a guy, you've worked with different victims and you've studied on this topic. What should a guy expect his journey to look like once he starts to talk about this and explore the help that he needs? What does this look like going into the future for him?
Well, I would say, yes, it's going to be difficult, or it can be difficult. It's not easy to talk about this kind of stuff, but I would just encourage them, they've already lived through the worst, right? We're not going to recreate that abuse that happened. We're just going to, I would, try to educate them that, the idea of doing therapy is so that their abuse is not so sort of front and center, always coming up, always being reminded of them, so that they can sort of, integrate those memories as, part of their past rather than be so, coming up continually right now.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. We're running out of time and there's so much to talk about. I want to talk about, communicating this with our family. So I want to look at this on two levels. I want to talk about, first of all, how we communicate to our families that we were abused. But then I want to turn it around and also say, if someone's a spouse or a family member or a friend who's listening to this, we'll talk about how they should support a man who was abused as a child. And so we'll look at it from both sides. So let's start from the victim's perspective. He realizes that he's been abused. He's starting into his healing journey. What advice would you give to him in terms of how do you share this news with a spouse or family members or friends in your life to help those people really understand the impact of what happened?
Right. And I never like to place the burden on a victim to sort of prepare the family. But I think a little bit of preparation could actually assist them. So I would suggest, telling their family or pick a person that you trust and say, I have something I want to tell you, right? I would like some of your time to talk about this. Maybe saying things like, this might be hard for you to understand. This might be difficult for you to believe. It might be, upsetting to you because of what I'm going to tell you or who it involves. Just sort of create that space for themselves so that their listeners are emotionally prepared, right? Like,
yeah.
When I took notice of males as victims, I was a police officer, and I was in a conference that was, teaching us how to investigate these crimes committed against children. And our guest speaker was Sheldon Kennedy, a former pro hockey player. And he started off by saying, "I can't believe I'm in a room full of cops." And he was vibrating. And I was like, okay, he really means this.
Right.
So it really caught my attention and let me know that he had something really important to disclose. So just that sort of even 1 minute of preparing me, made me pay attention and, pay extra attention. So, I would encourage victims that, if possible, get a support first, right? Like someone you trust, someone is going to believe you, someone that can sit beside you, or just one person rather than the whole crowd at one time kind of thing, and have that support available.
Yeah, that's good. So, okay, let's turn it around now. You're the spouse or a family member or a friend, and you're listening to the conversation you and I are having today, and you're trying to figure out, how do I really love and support this person in my life who has experienced this abuse? What kind of advice would you give to that family member or that spouse or that friend?
Well, one thing they could say is, I might not get this perfect what I say to you, but know my heart's in the right place. That can be helpful.
Yeah.
Letting them know that, I believe you. It's not your fault. I don't think less of you. I'm here to support you. Asking the victim, what do you need? How can I support you? Those kinds of things. I also think it would be very helpful for family members to really educate themselves about the kind of barriers boys and men do face, so that they can sort of maybe predict those or counteract those for the male.
Yeah, that's good. Well, there is a lot more ground to cover on this kind of topic. We've just scratched the surface. I know. The book is called Men Too. Kelli, what is the best way for any of our listeners to be able to get a hold of the book?
It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. It's in chapters. It's called Men Too, Unspoken Truths About Male Sexual Abuse. If you go to my personal website, kellipalfy.ca, there's a link to purchasing the book. So
perfect. I want to encourage everybody listening, even if you don't think you know somebody who's experienced abuse, you probably do, and they just haven't told you about it. So get the book, educate yourself, so that you are able to support people around you as God brings those people into your life. Kelli, thank you so much. First of all, not only for this interview, but thank you for bringing this issue to the forefront of the conversation and helping, I think, to bring some hope to men who've experienced this kind of terrible trauma in their life. So just appreciate you so much bringing this to the forefront.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Hey, Kirk, I really appreciate Dr. Palfy. And one thing that I think for us guys that I cannot emphasize and encourage enough is to find a place, to find a community, to find someone that you can actually go and talk about it. I think that there is healing. There is an open door to start dealing with all those physical, emotional, and spiritual impacts that the shame and the trauma in itself cause them, man. And I think she points that out, how important it is for guys to start talking about it, of course, in a safe, confident environment. But I think, to me, that is a big lesson for that we can take out of this.
Oh, no question. Man, listen, shame is real. When something traumatic and evil has happened against you, when sin has been committed against you to this degree, if you've experienced abuse, there is a sense of shame. It just seems, especially with guys right now, we really feel, and we don't know what to do with it. And there's a thought process in our culture that just says, suck it up and deal with it.
Yeah.
Suck it up and be a man. You can fix whatever is wrong. But here's the truth. You're broken because of sin committed against you. It's not because of what you've done. It's because someone has just harmed you in an evil, malicious, unloving, ungodly way. And you're broken. And it's okay as a man to actually admit that you're broken, because that's the starting point to being able to move towards wholeness again. Yeah. And that's the message of the gospel of Jesus. Jesus invites us to be honest, yes, with our own sin, absolutely, and ultimately with our own sin. But part of what he wants us to be honest with is how sin has impacted us. And to be able to go to Jesus and to go to people who can point us to Jesus and help us to find healing and hope and restoration in these kinds of moments. And so I want to just urge you as men, get help for the sake of your marriage, for the sake of your family, for the sake of the people around you, for the sake of yourself. Get the help that you need to be able to find some sense of hope and healing in your life from this terrible sin committed against you. We have on our website at impactus.org a couple of articles that Dr. Palfy has written to dive into this topic a little bit more. You can go and search for those articles on the site. I would encourage you to do that. And then I know that a lot of guys who were abused are also caught in sexual sins themselves, and they don't know how to get out. And Mauricio, we have a very special event coming up, both on YouTube and on Facebook Live later in the month of November, talking about this issue.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to have a live event with Dr. Wise. Dr. Wise, he's an expert in this area of dealing with sexuality, addiction, abuse, and all of that. And he's going to be participating in this live and talking about staying clean for a lifetime. So that, in other words, that your past doesn't have to define who you are. It doesn't have to define your future either, but you can truly find freedom in Christ. And he's going to join us and talk about that into that live event on November 24th. You can get more details as you go on our website, impactus.org, and find more about that event. It's going to be, as Kirk had mentioned, it's going to be a live event on Facebook and YouTube. You can join us for free. Imagine that. So I think that's it's a great thing. It's
an amazing resource for men to be able to have that kind of time with Dr. Doug Weiss. Doug is a friend of mine, and like you said, Mauricio, he is one of the top experts in North America on this subject of sexuality, and he really ties it into God's vision, God's heart, God's design for us, and how we live in that, in this broken, fallen world. So I just want to urge men to carve out some time on November 24th to watch that episode with Dr. Weiss. I want to just wrap up the podcast today by just reminding us of something. And it's found in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 1. And it's a little phrase that I think we often read over when we read the first verse of any chapter or of any book in the Bible. We kind of just skim over the first because it's just the introduction. What does it really matter? But listen to what Paul says to Timothy as he writes this letter to him. He starts off by saying, Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, by the command of God our Savior. Now listen how he finishes the verse. And of Christ Jesus our hope.
Amen. Yeah.
Men, I believe with all my heart, if you have been sinned against and abused by anybody at any time in your life, Jesus is your hope. There is freedom. There is a way to be encouraged and find hope again in your life, and it's in Jesus. And I just encourage you to take some of the steps we've talked about today to begin to turn to Jesus to find that hope for your life. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.